I'm here with Gordon and Nancy Hunt with New Tribes Ministries or New Tribes Missions. And where do you guys currently serve on the mission field?
We serve in Paraguay, among a group of people called the Manhui.
And for those of us who were public schooled, where is Paraguay on the map?
Paraguay is in South America. It's between Bolivia, Argentina, and Brazil. Right in the middle. It's a landlocked country and small country, smaller than any of the other three that are around it.
And what do you guys do on the mission field?
I'm right now the translator. I translate the Bible from into the Manhui language. Actually, it's the New Testament, what we're translating into the Manhui language, so the people can read it for themselves.
And how long have you guys been serving there?
37 years, I guess you'd say. We started in 1975.
It's 37 years.
First went to the field in 75, and we actually moved out to the
10th.
Manhui about a year and a half after that.
All right, so we're going to talk in a future interview. I want to talk about you guys actually landing there and what that was like and your arrival there. So now that we have some idea of where you're at and what you're doing, let's back up a little bit.
Okay.
Where did you guys meet, get married, and were you raised in a Christian home?
Okay, I was raised in a Christian home in Indiana, but we moved out to Idaho when I was about 16. And we actually met in Canada at Prairie Bible Institute. And what were your other questions?
So you're Prairie grads.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you were raised, were your parents missionaries on the field?
No.
Pastor?
My father died when I was 6 and he was not saved.
Okay. But your mom was.
Mm-hmm.
So she raised you
right
in a Christian home under godly influence.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then you grew up where and when?
A lot of the same background. My mom raised us five boys in Southern California.
5 older boys, younger boys? Where are you at?
I was the second, and they were all younger than me, and raised us all as believers. And the pastor of the church that we began attending when I was in high school suggested that we go to Bible school after graduation, and I thought it was a good idea. And so, one of his schools he'd been to was Prairie Bible Institute, and he said it's a good Bible school, and he recommended, and did all the help he could to get me going there.
This was back in the 1960s?
Yeah, it was 68, 69, and so that's where I ended up.
And that's where you guys met?
We met between our sophomore and junior years, and fell in love. And
how soon after Bible college did you marry? Did you both go through
in
the full program?
No, we both went through. We graduated in April. It was a 4-year program, and we were married in July.
Yeah, got married pretty quick right after we got out.
Graduated in April, married in July.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But we knew each other 2.5 years?
Yeah, we know each other for 2.5 years. We actually were engaged between our junior and senior years.
Oh, okay.
So, unofficially.
You knew that's where you were headed.
We knew we were headed there.
We couldn't legally be engaged.
And
we would have had to drop out and come back, and we didn't want to do that.
No, so we just
which was fine with
we did what
as long
was
as
recommended.
It's not public,
You couldn't legally be engaged as far as the Canadian government was concerned?
No, just a school.
Just a school. It was just school.
If we were officially going to be engaged, then we had to drop out for a semester.
This is off the record.
Yeah.
No, they didn't care. They knew there were couples and stuff.
There's a lot of couples just like that.
It's changed a lot since then.
But we
was.
officially were engaged the day we left the Bible school, gave our rings to each other, or gave her the ring, and planned our wedding right after that.
Then got married a couple months later?
We got married.
Well, it was April, May, June, July.
Yeah, it was 3 months later.
3 months later.
But we were already communicating with New Tribes Mission before we actually graduated. And
so you knew you were going to mission field before you even got done with Bible college. Knew where you were headed.
I was interested actually in gospel recordings or some other mission in Latin America anyway. And when we started to get information about New Tribes, I realized that was really where God would want me, because it was the first time I'd ever realized that there was actually missions working in tribal people we call it pioneer missionary work, where nobody had been there before. And they actually contacted the people, began to work, and that really sparked my interest. And that's what I wanted to do. And I knew, that's what the Lord, I know, was leading us.
Yeah, just laid that on your heart.
Yep, exactly. And we didn't know what country, but we knew that that's what we wanted to do. Both of us did.
Now, did you know that you were going to go into South American type country, or were you open to?
I was open to
Africa,
anywhere,
China, anywhere else.
South America seemed like more where God was even already laying on our hearts. Even then, it really wouldn't have made any difference to me. Probably.
You were willing to go anywhere.
Yeah. And that was what I was telling the Lord. And obviously he was leading us that way. And when we got married, we went from being married. How many months were we married before we went into
married
training?
in July, and we went into the training in
February, January. So we were only married 6 months, and then we were already headed to the training program in Canada, back to Canada again. Like
over in Ontario.
We got married in Idaho, and possibly because when we applied from Canada. They sent us to the training center in Canada. They had like 5 training centers, 4 in the States and 1 in Canada. So we headed back to Canada again. So we went to Ontario, drove all the way across the States.
Wow.
And had no clue what we were getting into because we didn't have any money. We were like poor as church mice when we drove over there. Ran out of money getting over there even. Drove in and pulled in, and there we were. And there was about 7 or 8 other young couples just like us that had arrived at that same time. So we were like the newlyweds class there in the Mission Training Center there in Ontario.
Actually, a lot of them are because they come straight from Bible school.
They came straight from Bible school.
So had you been raising money or funds or anything like that before?
Not really.
The training?
The only thing we had was the church that we got married in, and the church that was my home church that said they'd help us a little bit when they could. So that's what we had for promise support.
We actually went to the field with $60 promise support.
In fact, I thought, in the back of my mind, that when we got there, we would get a job and pay our way through the training, pay our way through school, just like a college. And we were surprised. I was a little surprised to find out that wasn't the way it worked. We were supposed to be already trusting the Lord, to.
You're supposed to already have your support raised.
Some support, not a whole lot, but some anyway, when we got there. So it was a little bit of a surprise. But you know what? Always had enough food. We never starved.
Then January you were in training.
Yeah.
By the following July you went to the mission.
No, we actually went a whole year and a half in that training.
We had that training, and then we went into the language training, which was a year and a half.
Another year and a half.
Now, New Tribes has changed since then. They actually make you have a certain amount of support
before you go on.
And stuff. And their training centers have been styled down a little bit, so it's a little less time. And most of it's all done in one place now, other than the Bible school. They have their own Bible school. We just skipped that because we had gone to Prairie.
See, the New Tribes has 2 Bible schools that train, and they were set up mostly to train MKs that come back from the fields. But, of course, we didn't go to their Bible school. We didn't even know there was a Bible school at that time.
We had just heard about New Tribes from my home church and then from up at Prairie.
Oh, and you've been with New Tribes for 37 years.
Mm-hmm. We have
never switched missions organization. You started with them.
We've been ever since. But when we first got to the training center, we started to realize that all these other students had come from the New Tribes Bible School. And so they all knew each other, kind of.
Oh, I see.
A lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them did. But that's where we started. And then we spent that year and a half there in training. And what it was, the training that we had there was like, a lot of it had nothing to do with missions. It was basically dealing with issues, married couples, things that we need to know as young people, how to study the Word of God a little bit more, how to
just basically walk with the Lord.
We actually learned how to walk with the Lord, it pulled us out of legalism into genuine walking with the Lord, basically.
And you had sort of a legalistic bent because
of my own home background.
Your own home background, your home church background?
Yes.
And Prairie in those days probably didn't.
Same thing. Yeah, same thing.
Didn't really push you out of it.
No. And for her coming out of a Baptist, it was probably less than myself coming out of a Plymouth Brethren background.
So when you left Prairie, went to New Tribes, was that culture shock to you?
It was a little bit because the mission fellowship and all was a whole lot freer than what I had ever lived in as far as Christians were concerned. And even the music, some of the music and the things that they talked about were not what I would have expected from a mission organization. But it's just because they were people who were freer in their understanding of grace than I was.
That seemed like a bunch of liberals to you, probably.
In a sense. I didn't put a label on it like that, but yeah, kind of like that. And as we began to grow spiritually, began to realize that it wasn't about how you performed anymore. Yeah. And see, that was all performance before. Right. Even going through Bible school was performance. It was how to do well, and to see people would see you as a spiritual person because of the things you did. That was how I grew up. And Prairie, I'm sure they taught grace, and I know they did, But in my background was already that built-in performance. That's where we were even in that. But as you begin to realize, and we had struggles as a young couple, and we were newly married.
Yeah.
And the leadership in the we called it a boot camp back then. Now they just call it missions training. But back then, they saw those problems that we were having, and immediately they were on them. And they were on us to help us. We had counseling. It was right there. They'd pull us in, sit us down, and say, look, this is, you're having a struggle here. We see this. Let's get your act together. And so they were helping us constantly. And it was the best thing in our lives.
Just applying the gospel to your marriage.
Applying it to our marriage.
Yeah, they did it like he says, pulling us in. They'd have us over for a meal, sit down and be friends with us, talk with us,
they'd spot things, and put a finger on it and say, look, you need to learn here.
It was
very, very good for us. It actually, we were kids, and we began to mature in that environment. That was a year and a half. And actually, one time, one of the leadership said, you know what? If you guys don't begin to deal with some of these things in your life, you're out of here. This is the end of it. And we were, we was that close because we were struggling. We'd never learned these things before, never heard these things. All of a sudden, it was no longer performance. It was, what your heart was like. It just, I knew it, but it wasn't in there. It was up in the head,
Right.
Well, it's our natural tendency to perform.
Right.
Because even starting a Manhui church, their natural tendency
is to do what you want. Yeah.
Right.
And so we see that even with the Manhui people today, some of them, but we've been there, so we know where, how to advise and help and teach now. So if we had gone, it's interesting too, because a lot of people come out of Prairie Bible Institute, any other place in our age, they went straight to the mission fields. They were ready to go. But obviously, Lord knew we weren't ready to go.
Yeah, put you in some place where you could grow out of that.
We needed that growth. And then, so we spent that year and a half there. And then we went from that point. We did a little bit of traveling and got back to our home churches, some of our family. And there were a couple people that said they'd take us on more than that. I don't remember if they ever did or not. But we had more prayer support then when we went. Then we went from there into Missouri, where they had the language training center, still there today, the New Tribes Training Center. And we spent another year and a half there. And that was the more technical part of it then. The first part was basically learn how to walk with the Lord. The second part of the training was linguistics.
You learn Spanish or whatever
trade language
of the country you're going to.
If you have a tendency towards linguistics, then they train you in linguistics. But basically the biggest part of the program was just learning how to acquire a foreign language on your own without lessons. You make your own lessons is basically what it was. Learn phonetics.
Learn it by being immersed in it.
Right. And teach yourself the language.
Now, when you were at Prairie, knowing that you were going to go into the mission field, were you taking any courses of study that was geared toward equipping you for that, or was it just kind of general basic Bible education?
No, I switched there was different courses you could take in missions, but it was more like, there was one that was on missions acquisition, cultural acquisition, but it really didn't go the way we would have. Yeah. It didn't help any, really. It just mostly was information.
Didn't hinder anything.
But I did change from a music major, if we'd call that today, it was a major, to a missions major about halfway through Bible school. And that's when I took more missions classes. But there was no cultural acquisition courses or language courses offered at that time. There may be now, but there weren't back then.
Did you study Greek and Hebrew?
No.
At Prairie? No.
I wish I had.
Yeah.
I really do, because they did offer it. Now, if I look back at it, it would have helped some. But the training we got in the New Tribes training, though, far better prepared us for anything because we learned I took linguistics, and I took the phonetics courses. We both did. And, what else was there? Oh, and the cultural, they would call it cultural anthropology today. It was basically how to understand and file cultural information so you could understand what their worldview was.
Yeah.
And those courses have improved tremendously now since we went through.
Especially since they have computers.
And with computerization now, they've got programs that help in that now. But back when we were doing it, it was all using punch cards and writing all your stuff down on 3x5 cards. And we learned how to do it. And that's how we actually did it when we got to the field, the same way. We came from out of that training, we went 6 more months. I worked at a job, made enough money to buy a ticket to South America with her and our baby we had then, and we took off. We got to the field
in July, and you arrived at the mission field with one child.
Yeah, and we had no
a month and a half later.
No support.
We had Jeff.
We had no support behind us other than these 2 churches.
Only 2 churches supporting.
It wasn't very smart.
We were pretty ignorant when it came to raising support.
You have how many children?
We have 5.
5 children.
Yeah.
And who are they? What are they doing? And where are they at now?
Okay.
Start with tax deduction number 1.
That's Jamie. He was born when we were in the language school. We went to the field, and a month and a half later, the second one was born. That's Jeff. Now, those 2 guys are now on the field with us.
Jamie and Jeff are on the field.
Jamie and Jeff on the field.
With their wives and families.
They started out working with us. Now Jamie is starting work with another tribe, and Jeff's still with us with the Monohui. Yeah. Then we had Jeremy, who is living in Post Falls. We had him 15 months after the other one was born.
And that's when we had Jeremy. We were still in language study on the field. And 2 months after he was born,
then we
moved out to the Monohui tribe. So we had a newborn baby basically out in the tribe with us.
We had 3 children under 3, and we moved into a tribal.
So that's 3 boys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then we have 2 girls.
2 girls.
And they were born 4.5 years. Let's see. After the boys, Kyla was born, and then Kendra was born 2.5 years later.
Yeah. And where are they at?
Kyla's in Delaware, and Kendra's right now in Florida, but she's moving up to North Carolina.
All your children married?
Kendra's not married, our youngest.
Kendra, your youngest, and how old is she?
28.
28, okay.
26.
Out of your 5 children, 2 of them are back on the field with you.
Mm-hmm.
One serving with you, one serving near you. Any plans for any of the others to head to the mission field? The daughters have any?
Not at this time.
Geared up that direction?
Kyla is, if any of them, Kyla's more interested in missions, but I don't know that she's...
Well, they're all interested.
In missions. In fact, they're all supporting missionaries, somewhere. But as far as going...
Whether or not they're serving, a different issue.
Yeah.
They're heading out.
Yeah. None of them are.
Okay. And grandchildren?
Only 13.
13 grandchildren. How many of them on the mission field?
6.
6 of them are on the mission field, and 7 of them are back here. We don't have anything to complain about.
No, not really.
And your oldest grandchild is 16.
16.
So he's a couple years from you having a great-grandchild, perhaps, on the mission field.
Possibly so.
You could have a great-grandchild on the mission field serving with you or near you.
Yeah.
I always think it's interesting because our daughter-in-law, Jamie's wife, Shar, she is a 3rd-generation MK on both sides.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's
her grandparents on her mother's side were in Japan with New Tribes Mission. Her grandparents on her father's side were in New Tribes Mission in Colombia. They're both retired. Yeah. But now her
parents are still missionaries in Colombia, and they're translators as well, Bible translators, doing the same work we are.
And so she's doing this similar work?
Yeah.
And Jamie's doing work translation?
Jamie will be the one, but she's going to be right there beside him helping. Right. It's actually her dad that's a translator, and Jamie's a translator.
Wow.
And then Jeff and Stacy are in the tribe with us still, with the Monohui people, and Stacy's mother is also a Bible translator.
And we went through the training
with them.
Is that right?
Yeah, it was interesting.
Before we had any idea, of course, if you know in the future, it would be fun. But
yeah, you know.
We were in the training with her folks.
Yep.
So, and not only that, her uncle was one of our coworkers on the field. The Humphreys. Years ago, we worked together in the Monohui tribe with her uncle and aunt.
And his son is now working with Jamie with this very Indian tribe down there.
So you've had all 5 of your kids have been raised on the mission field.
Right. Yeah, and they were all homeschooled.
All of them homeschooled while you were serving
with them in the Monohui tribe. Yeah. They all, in fact, they would be in their studies studying with the Indians looking in the windows watching them the whole time.
Because the Indians thought this idea of school was something
they had no idea what it was at that time when they were doing school. We hadn't started an Indian school yet, so they were just watching them. They didn't have a clue what they were doing.
How did you get connected? This was back to Prairie, I think. Mm-hmm. How did you get connected with Kootenai Community Church?
Not until we were on the field.
It was already, we'd already been on the field for probably 4 years, 5 years.
Now, your home sending church is how far away from here?
It's in Coeur d'Alene.
In Coeur d'Alene.
So 45 minutes away.
Right.
But because of our friends, Pastor Dave
and what's his wife's name?
Dave and Betty.
Dave and Betty.
Yeah.
They wrote us
They wrote and
and
said,
asked
could you
us
come
if
and
we
speak
would,
at the church?
and they wanted the church to start supporting.
In around 86 when
You're right.
So you'd been to the mission field almost 10 years before Kootenai started supporting it.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Okay, and they knew you, Dave and Betty Kinney, who pastored the church when Kootenai started
Because,
in the 1970s. They knew you through what connection?
Through their son Dave, I believe. Because Dave and I
in Bible school. Well,
Dave Kinney,
he married my best friend.
Junior, we're all good friends, and that was her best friend's.
We got married 2 weeks apart,
husband.
and we were in each other's.
We were in each other's wedding, yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's how we knew Dave was from that connection.
And you also know one of our other missionaries, Dave and Lois Belch.
Right, and he went to Bible school also with us as well.
At Prairie.
At Prairie, yeah. Yeah, because Dave graduated with us, and he was in the 3-year program, and I'm not sure, but I think
he did,
Dave
but
Belch
I don't
was
remember.
too. Yeah, I think they were both in the 3-year, while we were in the 4-year. So they kind of caught up to us and graduated with us.
Okay. So 7 years of Bible college before you go to the mission field, and then you arrived at the mission field with the Monhui. How did you... Tell me how it is that you felt called, and I use that term loosely, to the mission field. Did you hear a still small voice, see writing in the sky, read the tea leaves? How did God plant providentially your feet among the Monhui?
That's a good question.
Like how... I mean, for me, when I was growing up, I got very interested in missions. I have no idea why or anything. I just know that as I heard about missions in my church, they had quite a bit to do with missions. I was very interested in missions. And then when I was in high school, I got real interested in the native Indians of the U.S. and just studied a lot on them. But when I went to Bible school, actually, no, I take that back. When we moved out to Idaho, a missionary came because he knew our pastor. And when I got out there, he came and he was with New Tribes Mission. So I heard about New Tribes Mission, and then I went to Prairie.
But you knew about it before Bible school.
Then I went to Prairie, and they started coming to Prairie at our missions conferences and stuff. Then I heard about...
So where'd your call come from?
Called to be a missionary? I have no idea. I guess I just always kind of sort of wanted to be, but I don't think I had the foggiest idea.
If you didn't hear a still small voice or read the tea leaves, how do you know you're called? I mean,
well, basically, I know you are. I have no doubt about that. You know what? This is just an interesting story. When we went through 4 years of Bible school. The rest of the 3 years, we don't really call Bible school. It was like our mission training. We had a little bit of jungle camp training, how to live without stuff, plus how to walk with the Lord. Then we went into the language school training, and we started learning about language and how to acquire a language, how to learn language. Plus, we learned the language of whatever country we felt like we might be called to.
Studied a little bit, yeah.
And we were sort of toying with either Bolivia or Paraguay. Well, I remember being in our first training when we were just actually out of Bible school, going into that training, I remember thinking I'd always sort of wanted to be a missionary and all that. I was really going to be a nurse, but I got married instead. But I remember thinking, when am I going to feel this ooey gooey wonderful feeling of love towards the Indians? Because I didn't really feel anything. I had no great love for the unsaved. Then I went into what we call our language training, and I still didn't feel it. It was just going to come, and I just figured, when the Lord wanted me to have it, I would have it. Then we went down to the mission field and studied Spanish and went out to the Monhui Indians. And I still wondered when I was going to get this ooey-gooey feeling because they weren't very lovable.
Yeah.
They weren't a bit lovable. They were, in fact, a little bit on the annoying side. They blew their nose in their hand and wiped it on the nearest post or side of our house or on the ground. Or it was not a pleasant thing. And it finally dawned on me that I didn't have a love for the Monhui people. So what do you do about it? Well, I told the Lord, I don't have a love. And once I began to realize that I needed the Lord to love those people, I began to love those people. It took a while, but it was no different than when we were coming to the field and I realized we were traveling around visiting people, and I remember a pastor pointing to us and saying, look at those missionaries who are trusting the Lord so much. And I remember just that night before crying and telling Gordie, how on earth are we going to go to the mission field? We have no money for it was only $900 at that time, a ticket to go to Paraguay. It would scare the liver out of me. And I remember him telling me that, when the Lord, when we don't have it right now, but he will give it to us when we need. And we just have to tell the Lord, I don't think you're going to get me to the mission field. So I told him that. I don't think you're going to get me to the mission field. How can you? I know nobody rich. Our churches aren't rich. How are we going to get to the field? I don't know. But I remember just saying, okay, Lord, I don't. And it's no different. But he got us there. And it's the same way with the idea of loving the Indians. Yeah. And still, once I even got used to the Indians and began to realize they all had their personalities, you get to know them and you love them, there were still some of them that weren't very lovable. Just like my next door neighbor might not be very lovable, or somebody in my church, or somebody in my Sunday school might not be very lovable. So I asked the Lord to teach my heart to love that person. And that's just...
Yeah, I asked the question because I find that as I'm talking with our missionaries, they don't, none of you can relate a Macedonian call type vision, or a Damascus Road type experience, or a dream, or writing in the sky, or seeing the face of a Manhui on a piece of toast, or whatever it might be, some sign. And a lot of people, Christians, your rank and file believers out there who listen to this recording, think that
they're looking for it. Or
I'll go to the mission field when I absolutely know, because the signs and the writing and the tea leaves all line up, and I know that I'm supposed to be called to do X, Y, and Z at this location. Yeah. And
obviously they're not going to go until they get that.
No, they won't, because they're waiting for that.
Yeah.
And some people, I'm sure, use that as justification that
possibly
I'm not called to the mission field, and other people are honestly believing that they will do something when God does something so unmistakable to direct their steps.
The thing is, the call is already there, because when you read the scriptures, when Jesus said, "Look at the fields; they're white unto harvest," and he said, you need to go. He was telling the disciples that. Well, obviously that was speaking to all of us.
Now you're getting back to the sufficiency of Scripture thing again, right?
That's right.
It's enough.
It is.
It is. That's all you need.
But the thing is that sometimes we get an idea of missions, too, in our mind. But the thing is, we're called wherever we are, whatever we are doing, whether we are a pastor or a missionary or a teacher at school or a nurse or a mechanic. Yeah. We are called to present Christ.
Or to live him, for sure.
And live him,
Yeah. Some people think the call is that specific Macedonian vision.
And it's because of improper teaching or lack of teaching or whatever, something they heard, who knows. But I do remember, and I think God in his wisdom knows what we need, because I can remember throughout my childhood being exposed to missions over and over and over again. My mom, for instance, when we began to attend this church that I grew up in, she always had missionaries stay in her house with us. So firsthand, all of us boys got a firsthand experience getting to know a missionary and to hear the stories, to realize that person was just like us. Yeah. They weren't any different. So it built in things. Oh, yeah, I can be a missionary. If they can be, I can be. Yeah. So all along, I was exposed to that from my mom. And then in our church, one of the elders was responsible for gospel recordings, building those little wooden, they call them phonettes back in those days, where they'd put a record on it and they by hand turn it. But it was just the box, just the wooden box. That he built those things. And he always had all the young people come in on Saturdays, and we'd all work with him and build these boxes. And at the same time we were working with these, he was telling us where these things were going to go, out to some mission field. He was basically putting us as a hands-on experience with missions right then. And then in that church too, we had missionaries come and visit us and speak. So we were getting that exposure and finding out that missions was nothing more than just doing what God wanted you to do. And that's
wherever you
are. And that's basically where it started, I think, in my life. That was, if you want to call a call, there's a call right there.
Yeah. So what you ended up doing was feeling, and I hate to even use the term feeling, but definitely your heart was inclined in that direction.
Already.
You wanted to serve God wherever he might
That's right.
place you.
Exactly. And at the very beginning, even as a young kid. Now, I didn't know where it was going to be or what I was going to do. In fact, I started to head towards being an electronics engineer. I loved gadgets, loved electronics,
Still do
it to this day. And I think God used that drive because I could fix just about anything as a kid. And I see, as I look back on that, the training in linguistics fit right into that, figuring out the language. I just applied the same thing into that. And so he was using in my young life back then my desires, and he applied it later on in life. And I think that's how God works in our lives. He just takes us what we're already inclined to do, and he applies it as long as we're open and honest and listening to the Holy Spirit. I think he just keeps us moving right along. So much for a call.
So was there a struggle with obedience to go? I mean, that was huge uncertainty of two supporting churches, a newborn child. You're pregnant with another one. It's June, the end of June, July. You're getting ready to get on the airplane because God's provided the $900 ticket.
Which I worked to pay for.
So you provided it through your job.
Most of that, yeah.
So did you struggle with the issue of obedience? Is this the right thing? Do we go ahead and go through with this? Or did you just dive right in without even thinking about it?
I think we pretty well dived in without thinking about it.
I thought of the finances.
You did. Oh, yeah,
it was
you
a
did
little
more than
scary,
I did.
but...
Yeah. It was more, I think it hit me more when we got to the field. Once we stepped off the plane in this foreign country that you couldn't speak hardly a word of the language, and there was stuff coming at you faster than you could understand it, I thought to myself, we didn't buy a one-way ticket. I mean, we didn't buy a round-trip ticket.
What have I got myself into?
Well, yeah, what are we going to do now? We couldn't go back. And, it was starting to get rough down there.
So how did you pick Paraguay? Of all the countries, of all the continents, and what was the name of the city that you're closest to in Paraguay?
Yeah. The capital city now is Asuncion, but we were closer to Philadelphia.
Philadelphia, Paraguay.
That's where the Manhuis are. But no, when we first got there,
we went to the capital city.
To the capital.
Okay.
That's where we studied Spanish.
And really studied Spanish there.
Did you throw a dart at a map and you land in Paraguay? How did you pick that?
Well, we were thinking South America.
We were already thinking of South America. Both of us had
Bolivia or Paraguay, I think.
Had that already when we were in the beginning, the training after Bible school. South America kind of was, we just, where are you interested? Oh, I'm interested in South America. Well, I am too.
Some Latin American, Spanish type of.
Right. But then when we were in the training, there was more exposure to the different countries just in the studies, but there also was a family that came back from Paraguay, had just been on one of the staff in the missions training, and they had all these pictures of the Manhui, and they actually showed their slides and started talking about this one tribe that really had absolutely nobody there yet to hardly help in the training, and we both thought, man, let's go there.
There was the need for work?
There was the need, and that's where I think the Lord used that to work on our hearts, to cause us to want to go to Paraguay. And so from that point on, we knew we were headed for Paraguay.
And to the
Manhui.
And down in Paraguay is where you learned a little bit more of the trade language.
Right, yeah.
And did you know of the Manhui at that time?
Oh, yeah. Because they were already, when we arrived in Paraguay, before we got there, they even wrote and said, this is a need, this particular tribe, would you consider this? It's not that we will place you there, but would you consider working with the Manhui people? You've had linguistics. They need a person there to break down the language and to help in that. And from there on, that was what we were headed.
In new tribes, the mission field, the missionaries will stop at the language school and challenge students to come to the different way.
And that's what we were challenged, basically.
We were quite aware of,
already aware of the needs then when we were there.
The needs and stuff. And
so now there was somebody already at the tribe?
There were when we got there, yeah. They had
in fact,
an initial contact already.
Right, and then we met with one of the couples that were there at his parents' house.
Before we
they
went
were
to the
on
field,
the mission field, and so we had met with them.
So we knew one of the missionaries that was already working with the Manhui, and they actually further challenged us because they said we really need somebody that's had good training in linguistics to help finish up the linguistics, to get us into the literacy, and to move us on so we can be in teaching the people. So they'd been there from 2 years before we actually even hit the field.
Already doing work among the Manhui people.
The
Right.
Manhui were contacted in 71?
No,
70?
73.
Contacted?
Yeah, in 73.
Oh, in 73, and we got down there in 76.
70, yeah. So they had already been there for 3 years.
Okay. So now you've had linguistics training. How many languages do you speak fluently?
English.
Got that one?
And more or less, I wouldn't say fluently, would be the Manhui, but enough to be able to be a translator. I probably up to one of the higher levels.
And Spanish.
And we had to reach a higher level of the Manhui in order to be able to translate. But we also speak Spanish too.
You speak Spanish fluently?
Well,
Spanish is the trade language around Manhui people?
Spanish is the trade language. And we have lost probably more than we've learned in Spanish because we don't use it as much.
How close is Manhui to Spanish?
Oh, it's a completely, absolutely different language.
Did the Manhui know the Spanish?
They know. When we first got there, they knew a few words.
Were they able to just trade in that language? I mean, to make contact with people outside the tribe?
They didn't have any contact hardly with the outside world at all. They were pretty isolated.
Monolingual.
Very isolated.
Okay.
There would be a trapper that would come through maybe twice a year, and they would trap using sign language. And well, there was a couple guys that knew some Spanish, a little bit, and but that was about it.
Enough to dicker for some furs or whatever.
Between furs and whatever else that they wanted from him. Yeah.
So 3 languages.
Yeah, Manhui.
You do a little bit of work in Greek and Hebrew?
Actually, I depend more on commentaries, what's already been done, rather than myself, because I did not study Greek or Hebrew, which is to my detriment, but we still get by.
Yeah, you're still able to translate Scripture.
Right, we can.
Get the sense of God's Word into the language of the Manhui people.
Right. It's more based on all the different English versions. And I do look at the Greek once in a while and study the depths of it but it's usually from just commentaries.
Right. So you're studying in those exegetical commentaries for the purpose of knowing and understanding the meaning of the text.
The meaning of the text.
And once you get that, you can translate that into their language.
Right.
So it's not that you're going straight from Greek,
the
Textus Receptus, into the Manhui tongue.
That's pretty difficult to do that. That would be pretty difficult.
So,
in fact, most of our translators don't ever go there.
Most of New Tribes translators?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So give me, so that we can hear a little bit of what Manhui sounds like, can you recite John 3:16 in Manhui?
Well, I could tell you more or less in Manhui. It would be something like, because I didn't bring my Manhui Bible with me, but John 3:16 would be something like, Talpe pashinat neliha popopilatim popotnyo tishin pernate pahlas. Kek te pilatim popotnyo ti yuishaha pahlas. Kano shinat wete. Kai klamas kan take hinne.
Memorized, or are you translating?
No, I actually translated from English into Manhui in my brain just then.
So whether or not that would match identically what you published in John,
I probably doesn't, but it's close. I would say probably I know Manhui to what we would call a 4th level of high, which is like our mission requires a certain level to reach before you can teach, and another level before you can translate. And then there's, of course, other lower levels that, like, you could only work in literacy, but I have reached the top level that's required. But there are levels above that. Like if my kids they were born down there and they speak a higher level than I do because they grew up speaking the language as kids.
Wow.
Like the kids are a little freer with them than they are with us.
Yeah. I didn't learn a lot of the phrases that the kids would be speaking among each other. I stuck with phrases that were mostly what I acquired from them, the way I learned the language. So I know the grammar better than any of my kids do, but they speak the language better than I do. They might not speak it correctly all the time, whereas I would speak it correctly. But the Manhui aren't all consistent either. So, but I know the language. I know the grammar.
So what, linguistically, sound-wise and word-wise, what is Manhui close to? It's not close to Spanish. It's entirely different?
No.
Is it close to Portuguese or?
No. No other Latin American national language.
It'd be like if you ask what's Cherokee close to? English? It's not.
No. It'd be like that. About that far
It's so
away.
radically isolated that it is unlike anything else.
Any other trade language. that you would find anywhere.
Now, I don't even know if you'd be able to answer this question, or if you would know the answer to this question. How far back does that language go? They don't have written records because they didn't have a written language when you showed up.
Right, but there are some books that were where these anthropologists were studying languages back in the early 1900s and even back in the late 1800s, where they have recorded some of the words in Argentina, where there was a very close similar tribe, and they published those word lists, and they're very close to Manhui. So they probably were their ancestors back in the 1800s. It would be like, 15 generations ago, maybe 20 generations back.
And language has changed?
And it's changed some. But they still had you could tell it was basically the same language.
Okay.
So that's late 1800. And there was a mission even established in 1904 with a people group that are probably the closest people group to the Manhui on the border of Argentina and Paraguay. And that was back in then it was the Anglican church actually. But it was not very evangelical, I'm pretty sure, because all they learned was how to sing well.
Oh.
They sing very well. We've visited there, and there are some Manhui living in there in the same group, and that's all they know how to do is sing.
So just for timeline overview now, you arrived at the mission field 1976, July. How long until you picked up pen and paper and started translating something into Manhui language?
86, 85, 86.
So it took you 10 years to learn the language.
Yeah. The first year and a half was in Spanish only, still in the capital city. From the time we got there to the time we actually were able to start translating was 10 years.
10 years.
Yeah.
And then where do you begin? You got 66 books to choose from, plus the Apocrypha and the Book of Mormon.
We began in the book of Genesis, and that was our first book we translated.
The whole book?
The whole book. But we didn't get but half of it done in the first so many years, and then we left at chapter 25 of Genesis, and we jumped into into Mark, and we translated the book of Mark after that.
And you translated the whole book of Mark.
Yeah. And then we did actually, we had half of Genesis, parts of Exodus, just a few chapters of Exodus done. And then we jumped into Mark and did the book of Mark. And from Mark, did James, then Acts. And then, then we did a couple other books, I think, too.
Yeah, back up just a second. You started in Genesis.
Yeah.
I know there's a theological reason for this. Why?
Because we believe that when you begin teaching the Bible to an indigenous group of people, you need to start at the beginning. You
can't just dive into Jesus came.
No. They would never, there's too many things that they'd never grasp. They needed to understand what sacrifices were. They need to understand who God is. They need to understand
where the world came from.
Yeah, they need to understand all the creation. They need to understand where sin came from. Otherwise, they would never understand why Jesus had to come. So you have to back up all the way back to the beginning. And what we found is that if you chronologically give them the background, give them a foundation for the gospel, then they'll understand the gospel. And so that's why Genesis.
You can't just dive into the gospel.
No. Absolutely not.
It's I've heard it compared to like Peter in Acts chapter 2 begins with the Jews who understand all of that.
Right.
He begins with this Jesus whom you crucified, God has raised up and appointed him as both Lord and Christ.
And they had all the cultural background already.
Yeah, they had all of that, so he could start there.
Yeah.
Paul in Acts 17 goes to a group of people that didn't have that background.
Right. And he starts with their gods out there. Yeah.
And then let me introduce you to this God who is the unsustained sustainer. And he goes back to the nature and character of God before he gets to the gospel.
Yeah, and they had and see with the Manhui people, they didn't even have a word for a good God. All they had was evil spirits, and they had evil spirits and they had helper spirits, the ones that they would call and acquire their power in order to heal somebody. And so we began to talk about a spirit. I started looking for a word that was one of those spirits. Is one of those spirits? Is he good, completely good, where he can help you? So I was looking for a name for a God. Can we use the spirit of for instance, can we use the Hosa, which was a bird that was also a spirit, and they always called on the Hosa to come and help them and empower them. I said, well, can I call? And I started telling him, I says, give me some of the characteristics of the Hosa. Is he immoral? Oh yeah, he can be very immoral.
This was a good spirit.
That was their good spirit. The best
immoral.
Spirit they had was immoral. So I couldn't use that for the name for God. I had to find a spirit that wasn't immoral, a spirit that would be the closest to that one, but still good in all aspects. There was none. And so then I said, well, we want to talk about this other spirit that you guys don't even know about. This is the one I'm writing and want to write about, and who we have his words already written down. I want to tell you about that spirit. What can we call him? They said, well, we kind of heard about something from over on the river, and they call him Los. Los.
Well, they can't say
Los.
D's.
What is Los? And so the more I asked them, using their own language by this time, I began to realize that was Dios, the Spanish word for God. So we decided to go with that. But the more I started talking about him, I said, well, he created everything. And they said, well, why not call him Shinat? I said, what does Shinat mean? That's our Father, the one who gave us everything.
And our means everybody.
In our
me
Father.
and everybody.
And so that was the word that we began to use, but they obviously needed to know we had to build meaning into it. So instead of using Los, which was their misunderstanding of the God in Spanish, we chose Shinat, which was our Father.
So was Shinat a good?
That was good. That actually had zero meaning, except meaning our Father. And we could teach.
So
nobody ever used that.
They didn't
really.
use that word.
There was no moral.
There was nothing.
There was no moral qualities attached
or
to
immoral.
No,
Right,
because
there was
it
nothing.
means our Father. And what Manhui, or even us.
We don't talk about our
Father. You don't
Father.
talk to him about our Father.
Except
because you don't have the same father.
Brother to brother would talk about that. But it became the best word using all the other ideas. That was the best word and I let them choose. And so Shinat became the name, our Father, even though they weren't believers yet, and he wasn't really their father yet. It still seemed to serve the purpose.
Then you had to build meaning into that.
We built meaning into it.
And you use that as the foundation as you're teaching through Genesis.
Right.
It's Shinat that has done that.
Shinat was the creator, yeah.
But now, as believers, when they talk to God, they say, my Father.
Yeah, they don't say our Father, they say my Father.
See, like they have a word for my Father, they call him Papa, just like everybody else. I mean, I don't know how, because it doesn't go along with the word, because Inet is really my Father.
That's when you.
But they've never really used that word. They always use Papa, and I don't know if they got it from Spanish, because...
Yeah, they did, I believe.
Yeah, because mother is Maimet, and it starts with a name, but what's our mother?
Inet.
Our mother.
I don't know.
I don't remember.
But languages, and you can't have a language without the culture. And the more we understood their culture, too, the more we began to realize that their understanding of God, being it was zero, the more we could add into that, the more we built into it, as we taught through Genesis and chronologically, should not fit the bill much better than Dios did. We could have used Dios. That wouldn't have been any problem, probably, too.
So then in Exodus, I'm assuming that you're translating stuff that has to do with the sacrifices.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The reason for those sacrifices.
Right. And that became the foundation for understanding all the rest of the Gospels later on. And it took us, as we were writing lessons like mad, as we started teaching, and the translation began at the same time. Like I began in Genesis. I also started teaching them at this time I was doing translation. Then our coworkers started picking up the teaching so I could go on in the translation. So I was doing Genesis while he was teaching them those first lessons about who God was. And he was using the written material that I had, and he could read them and then he could teach from it at the same time.
So then after Genesis, parts of Exodus, did you mostly focus on the New Testament?
By the time we were almost to the end of the original stories, and the stories of Noah and the flood and Joseph, by that time, when he was done teaching that, I was already starting to work in the Gospel of Mark. So I'd be ready for him when he moved into the New Testament. So we had some of the stories. We were actually doing some provisional translation. He was doing some, I was doing some, so that we would get the story of the whole life of Christ, even before we had the whole book of Mark done.
So after Mark, more Gospels?
No, actually, we jumped into the book of James then.
Now,
because it was an easy book.
Basically.
Why Mark? Mark, because it gave the whole gospel story.
A big, brief overview.
Overview, yeah. It wasn't an easy book to translate, though. I probably should have done Luke.
So,
as I look back on it.
When you start teaching them about the nature of this God, they today have the book of John in their own language.
Yeah.
Do they understand that Shenat became flesh and dwelt among us?
They do. Yeah.
They get
but
that.
see, that was no problem because his name was Jesus.
Yeah.
So they understand that Jesus is Shenat in the flesh.
In the flesh, yeah. Mm-hmm. They understand it very well.
But I always thought it was really interesting because of the name, because they have, what do you call them, like conjugations. Or you've got Papa, then you've got Anat, and Hinat. That's what they would use. They never really used Shinat or Inet.
Not in their language yet.
In their language.
Yes.
And so Inet fit and Shinat fit perfect for our father or my father, because if I'm talking to my dad, I call him Papa. And
if I'm talking about him, I call him
my father.
Yeah.
Papa.
Papa. It's still going to come out. It's still the same word. It's my father.
Okay.
It's just my father. And
the only time you'd ever use Shinat that wasn't referring to God would be two brothers or two sisters talking about their father.
And they very seldom ever do it. They just talk about.
They still say Papa.
Yeah, they won't.
So the word the word Shinat really was an unused word that really it had its already meaning built in, but it was an unused word. And their term of address when they're talking in prayer to God, when they talk to their own Papa, they'd say, Papa, would you go do this for me? But when they talk to God, they say, Inet, would you go do this for me? So they actually used old words that hadn't been used probably for years and years to even talk to God.
And we don't even know. It's like Mymet. You go Mymet, and then it's at and let, or his would be let. That's how the conjugation goes on their nouns.
Right.
And so you wonder what happened to mom in there, but basically we also found out one thing, or quite a few things about typical languages. Your mother and father, my mom and dad, usually are going to come up with M's and P's at the beginning.
Yeah.
Not always.
Yeah.
But a lot of times. It's just like your word for nose is usually going to have some kind of
nasal sound.
Yep.
Now so your first gospel was Mark, and then James, Acts, some of the epistles.
Right. Then we moved into Timothy, Titus.
And the whole time you're teaching them through each book as you translate it. You teach them through these books.
Well, not the epistles, because we actually went through the book of Acts, the early church, and we taught them by the time we reached the book of Acts, we had some believers, and so then we started to teach those believers what the church looked like, and that's why we went into the book of Acts, again chronologically. And then we needed something about the Holy Spirit, how the Holy Spirit works in your life. So from Acts, then we went to the epistles. What believers, the life of a believer is to look like. Timothy, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. So all the time we're teaching, they somewhat tie to those books, but we fell behind in the actual translation as far as what we needed for the church at the very beginning. But then we had a long period of time when some of us were on furlough, teaching got left behind, and so the church kept growing and kept going. And we were beginning then we started the book of Romans, and then we moved into that. And then Romans we should have had before some of the other epistles. Romans gives the basis for a believer and the life of a believer. And we they needed that long before we actually got to it. And I think that's why some of the believers got into the idea of works rather than grace, because they didn't have the book of Romans when they should have.
They're not understanding justification.
They didn't understand
imputed righteousness and these concepts.
And so by the time we actually did translate Romans, we had some believers that were thinking that it was all about performance, all about doing.
Now we come full circle.
Yeah, we did a full circle. Exactly. Yeah. So then when we started teaching the book of Romans, we saw a change in their lives. It was almost miraculous. Drastic change.
So how long after you started translating Scripture until you would have what was the first believer?
I think about 4 years maybe, because I think it was 87. Let's see, we started, 87, 88, 89, about 89 I think is when we had first believers. So it was about 4 years after we started teaching. Took about 4 years.
And did it seem most natural when you get to Mark, after going through Genesis, you get to Mark, you teach them about Jesus, which is Shanat in the flesh, for them to repent, they understand what repentance is and faith?
Yeah, it was pretty much about the time that we presented the fact that why Jesus came at the very end of it, when Jesus was crucified. It actually disappointed them because they already were looking for the fact, they thought that Jesus should be the Messiah, because we taught that the Messiah was promised. And when we brought him up through the life of Christ, then he was killed. That was pretty disappointing to them too. They were actually living the story by the time we got to that point.
Huh.
And then we said that we would present what happened after that. And we said, remember Jesus said that in 3 days something great would happen? All right, come back tomorrow and we'll tell the rest of the story. And so then we've told them that Jesus was resurrected from the dead, and he fulfilled everything that God required in the law, and he actually came back to life. It was incredible what they thought.
So they understood then the idea of sacrifice. They thought that this is the sacrifice.
This is the sacrifice. They were looking for the sacrifice. And then we were able to bring them back and say, look, he was the sacrifice. He gave his life, but he not only died for their sins, he actually proved the fact that he could forgive their sins by raising to life again. And that's when then we had 3 guys that stepped forward and says, I believe that. And those were the first 3.
And where are they today? Still in the tribe?
2 of them, one of them is a pastor, of the actual pastor now. He's been ordained pastor.
At the Manhui Church there.
In the Manhui Church. The other one is what we would call a deacon. He was a very angry man. He was a witch doctor. He's an older guy my age. And he was also one of those first 3. And he is now a deacon. He takes care of the church building and watches out for people and helps where he can.
He's turned from all of his witch doctor stuff.
Oh, my goodness, yeah. Yeah, incredible change in that man's life. The third man recently passed away, and he never really did anything really to help, but he was actually a self-appointed chief of the tribe, but fell away from the Lord for a number of years and finally came back on his deathbed, and he just died about 4 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
And today, how many believers there in that tribe? Well, first of all, how big is the tribe?
Well, the tribe is about 700 altogether, and it's split up into a lot of different areas. But I'd say totally is about 700. And out of the 700, I would say probably about 500 have heard the gospel story and have heard the teaching. Probably about 200 of those are saved, I would say. Maybe between 150, 200 maybe.
But if you ask Jeff, he'd probably have different. It's hard to.
How do you tell? There are what we call fringe people. They're
just
out
like
there,
America,
just like us here. There's those that are walking with God. There's those that just understand, and a lot of them believe, but probably have never grown. So it's hard to say how many. The actual meeting that meets in the church building in our area, plus 3 or 4 other areas where they meet together, I would probably say a total of about 40, 50 people that really are walking with God. But the rest of them, it's hard to know how many are really saved.
Yeah.
It could be we've actually baptized probably about 90 people. We haven't altogether, the Manhui as well as us, have baptized about 90. So I'd say 90 to 100 are probably Christians to some degree.
Yeah, the only one saved.
Yeah. Maybe a few more than that. There may be about 150 that are baptized. We don't count them, so I don't know.
And we don't know how, what they're, whether or not they really are.
Yeah.
Well, until there's growth.
Until there's growth. In their lives. Yeah, we don't.
But there are.
And we're not counting them anyway, really. That's up to God.
So now today, fast forward 27 years, today, how much of the Bible do you have translated?
We have got all of the New Testament except for the book of Hebrews and Revelation's finished.
Revelation is finished?
No, except for those 2.
Except for Revelation.
Revelation and
Hebrews. The only 2 books
Hebrews
we have left to do
are still left to go, and I'm actually working in Hebrews now.
And Revelation's next?
And Revelation's is next. Yeah.
And Old Testament?
We've got the book of Genesis. Oh, I forgot to mention, when Jamie got up to his language in Manhui a number of years ago, then he also became on the translation team, and he finished the book of Genesis. I had only done half of it. He came back and finished it. And then he also did I had rough stuff in Exodus. He did up to chapter 25 in Exodus as well. So we have all of Genesis done now. half of Exodus done, and then from there on we have actually the book of Jonah is done, and from there on there's just portions of Old Testament, all the Old Testament prophecies, and a lot of books that
like Isaiah 53, for instance.
All of Isaiah 53 is done. There's portions that are
Psalms?
needed, portions in the Psalms as well, not the whole book. Just pieces that we needed to show, tied to the New Testament, and give some of the gospel story.
So now you go in through the book of Hebrews, but the book of Hebrews is tied. I mean, it just goes all the way back to the Pentateuch. It's
Right.
Genesis to Deuteronomy fleshed out.
Yeah, and I'm finding there's verses that we could have translated still even in the Old Testament that tied it to Hebrews. So I'm going back and working through some of those as well.
So when you get done with Hebrews, are the people going to feel it will be a self-contained unit enough that they're not going to feel like they don't know the backstory?
Probably
they will
so.
be able to get it, but they're going to, obviously their understanding would be fuller if they had Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy.
Yeah, possibly so, I think. But we're going to depend more on the younger generation coming up learning Spanish and probably using some more Spanish by the time they actually really understand that well.
So do you think that the Manhui language is a long-term language? Is it going to be in that tribe? It's not going to go away?
It's not going to go away.
You're not going to find Spanish come in and take over it and all of your work basically become obsolete?
I don't think so. They call it a live language. It's one of the few that's maintained better than the others even in South America. And it's not that big language, but it's maintained. There are some of the languages in Paraguay that are tied to the Guarani language, which is the second language of Paraguay. A lot of those speakers are switching more into Guarani rather than keeping their old language, but not with the Manhui people. It all has to do with who they come in contact with, really, I think. So, and the Manhui are still fairly isolated.
Even after all these years?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that now they, we'll get into this, I guess, another time. When you arrived, they didn't have a written language?
No.
They didn't have any writings in their language?
Nothing. They didn't write anything down.
They didn't have an alphabet?
No.
They couldn't read?
They couldn't read. They didn't even hardly draw pictures on the ground.
So you had to teach them to read
their
own language. You actually had to create their languages, at least phonetically and with alphabet.
That's right.
With characters. Then teach them to read that language.
That's right.
So that now, today, they can read the language that you've translated the Word of God into.
Yeah, and not only can they read it, but their own teachers are teaching them how to read it. We set up the program to teach literacy. Now they're teaching it. We're not even a part of it.
We don't even teach reading anymore.
We don't touch it anymore.
So when years ago they were looking at you through the windows of the hut as you taught your children how to read.
That's right.
Thinking that was weird. Now they're doing the same thing.
Yeah, they have school almost every day, and we got two good teachers that were trained actually more by Jamie than myself. That was one of Jamie's. Besides doing translation, he was also teaching literacy.
Is there more exposure now to the outside world than there was when you showed up?
Yeah, and the reason for that is the roads have gotten a little bit better, but the Manhui themselves have been able to save enough money working from ranchers. They've bought some motorcycles. There's I'd say about 15 motorcycles now in the village, owned by different men, and they go in and drive into one of the nearer towns, which is about 100 miles away, buy supplies, and then come back. And they're becoming very mobile now. And plus there's ranchers that have moved in all around them, and ranchers hire these guys to work for them, and they're getting some exposure to Spanish as well, or Guarani, the other language. A lot of the ranchers don't really see the Manhui people as educated or high status. So instead of speaking Spanish to them, they speak Guarani to them. So the Manhui are learning Guarani as well. So they're learning two other languages, basically.
So 37 years you've created a written language, translated most of the New Testament, almost all the New Testament, taught them to read, turned over the teaching to them.
Yeah.
You have an indigenous church started, which is led by their own people.
Yeah.
And now your job is to finish up the New Testament. Where do you go from here? What's next?
We will actually, if possibly in 2.5 years, we will be done with the New Testament. We'll have published it. Maybe 3 years we'll have published it. We'll have given them also some, all the commentary that is now Bible lessons will be their commentary as well. And we'll also have a concordance finished and a dictionary. And
they'll have Bible study tools in their hands.
They will have all the tools that we will be able to give them, yeah. And they'll be able to actually, some of them are now even writing their own commentary.
Really?
Yeah, we've got one guy who's on the computer writing his own commentary right now.
On books of the Bible?
Jeff's helping him. Our son Jeff is helping him, but he's doing it himself. Yeah.
Like Monhui John MacArthur.
Yeah, he was working in Ephesians here when we left. I was impressed. I thought that's pretty good.
Yeah.
They don't need us hardly at all.
And now are they interested in sending out missionaries themselves?
They have already sent one guy to work in their own language. There's a group of people that were already churchized, Monhui people mixed with another group. So the Monhui church sent this family to work for them and to teach them through the chronological lessons a couple of years ago. Now he's wanting to go back and finish that teaching. He didn't finish. And then there's people on the river, the Paraguayan border between the river that borders Paraguay and Argentina. There's another group of Monhui. They want to send somebody down there as well to teach those people. So they're already sending, and they're planning to send somebody in these two places. Apparently something God did right there, huh?
Yeah. By His sovereign grace.
Yeah. That's the way we see it.
So what's next for you guys? You must be pushing 40 years old.
We're getting up there, and we're looking at possible retirement here in about 3 or 4 years.
And you're expecting to be done with the New Testament and a lot of the lessons and commentaries?
We will not retire until we've gotten all that done. I just mentioned, yeah. The book published. Actually, it's not really retirement because I'll probably end up working some more on the dictionary, possibly even do some commentary myself for them.
Is that stuff you can do from
But we'll do that from
here?
the States, yeah. We'll be back. We'll come back to the States and do some of that. Finalize the dictionary, maybe even do some finalization of the linguistic write-ups that I never really published before then. I don't know.
And now you want to do a little bit of revision in the New Testament as well.
And there's some revision needed to be done, yeah.
As you've learned the language more.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and terminology has changed over the years. See, it's been like 15 years, and when we first started in the book of Acts, we were using words like, it kind of meant the right thing, but we've learned, and we published the book, but now we've got a better terminology for sacrifice. We've got a better terminology for even grace now that we had published back in the book of Acts. So those books need to come up to the same terminology.
So you're using different words for grace in Acts than you used for grace in Ephesians or Romans.
That's right. So those books have to be redesigned and brought up, but it won't take a whole lot. You just have to run them through one language helper, and bring it up to and they'll correct it as we go.
So what are you going to do about the Monhui only crowd that just wants the original 1611, or it would be a 1986 version of the
They're the ones
Monhui
that are telling
one.
us to revise it.
They're the ones that ask us.
Oh, you don't have a Monhui only segment down there that?
No. In fact,
if the king didn't translate it, it's not good enough?
I'll tell you something very interesting, okay? I was working with one guy, and we had developed the term for prophet. The word for prophet there was no, it was hard to get a word for what a prophet was. And so
prophet, P-H-E-T.
Yeah, the word that the guy that was in the Old Testament telling these stories. And so we just decided, well, we'll just get along with the Spanish word. We'll just drop a Spanish word in there and teach what it meant. So we used the word profeta for the word prophet. And it went along for 2 or 3 books. And all of a sudden my language helper said, you know what? All the people, when they get to that word, they just kind of stop and they laugh. They don't know what it means. He says, can we just say this word? And he gave me a beautiful Monhui phrase that fit perfectly. Well, why didn't they give that to me years ago?
They didn't know.
Because they didn't know. They didn't understand what this guy's job was.
Yeah.
So now, in the newer books, I'm using the word, he who tells God's word. It kind of means that. But it was a very, very...
Is it like a forth teller, kind of somebody who proclaims?
Right. And so now we've got that in the newer books, but see, it's not in the older books. And there's a lot of words like that. I couldn't come up with a good term, so I would drop a Spanish idea. So that older version has more Spanish in it than the newer version does. The newer version is more pure Monhui, actually. And it speaks better.
So 2 questions that I always ask everybody. Actually, three. Number one, what makes you guys so special to be on the mission field? How are you uniquely gifted? What makes you different than the average Joe sitting in the pew on a Sunday morning that you're able to do this?
That's a interesting
You're shaking
question.
your head.
I don't know.
Yeah, so that you can translate that to tape.
Yeah. Okay, shaking my head. I have not a clue anyway.
What makes us so special that we could be?
You're super saints. Aren't you missionaries? You're super saints. You
I
have
hate
more
to tell
faith
you
than
this.
everybody else, more obedience, more...
I don't think
Your
so.
spirit, you struggle with sin less than other people. Your
That I know is definitely not true.
your kids are less sinful.
Absolutely not.
The demands of your life are different, right?
No.
You live on a different plane.
I tell you what, I think you guys living in the States have a lot harder time than we would. In a lot of things. I think there's more temptations here. There's more struggles here than some of the things we would struggle with. I mean, people say, oh, but you live with snakes and you live with spiders and you live in the dirt and you live in all the, and it's harder.
Give
you
me
don't have,
those any day instead of the traffic.
believe me, it's a whole lot more tranquil, a whole lot more easy for us than I think it is for you guys as a pastor.
You went to the mission field to escape the rigors of American Christianity.
Absolutely.
You're weak. That's what it is. You're weak.
Yeah, so
No, there are many times. I come away now going out. We went out to visit them, and
that was when we were younger, by the way.
It gets so hot, I look at Gordie and say, I'm not very good missionary material.
We see our kids now
So
living the way we
hot.
lived 20 years ago, and I don't know, we couldn't do it to this day. There's no way. We just, it's too hard.
Yeah, too tough.
Too tough.
How can people?
But back when we were in it, that was a preferred life.
You just dealt with it. That was the way life was.
And not only that, but it was an easy life. It was not easy because it took a lot of time to live. You know, you had to go out and start the generator every day. You had to haul your own water. You had to get your firewood. We lived pretty primitive, and it took a lot of time just to live. Whereas today, the younger missionaries, you know, they have a whole lot less of those things that they have to do.
And besides that, Indians and everybody have cell phones.
And they all have cell phones. It's just life has gotten a little easier for them. But I couldn't go back and live the way we did then. Now it was too hard, and we're older. You know, it's just and it's hotter.
And you don't live on the mission. You don't live with them on Hui right now, right?
No, we
probably
moved,
clarify that too.
Yeah, we moved out of the Indian village about 8 years ago, and the reason we moved out was because I'm a fix-it man, okay? And the Indians had a lot of things that they needed repairing. Once they started getting bicycles and watches and radios, they didn't have a clue how to fix them, and so I was called on to fix them. They also had they needed help with the houses that they were building, and so I began to find that I was being called on so much I needed to get away from that and work in a place apart from the Indian tribe. Not only that, there's two things. Another thing is the older generation the first generation of Christians looked to me kind of like Papa, kind of like the father.
Yeah.
But the younger generation wasn't coming up. They were kind of being held back because we were there and kind of in control still.
Why step into leadership if somebody else is there?
Exactly. And so when we pulled away and moved away, then all of a sudden the younger generation came up and became the leaders, the Christian leaders of the tribe. And that's what was needed. And God saw that.
And you have more time to devote to doing what you want to do.
And I could spend 10 hours a day working in translation. And that's why we moved away from the tribe. And that's basically, it's been the best thing we did.
So how far away now do you live?
We live about 120 miles away. It's a long ways to drive, but we go back about every 3 weeks. I go back in and take material, translated material to check I spend about a week out there and check the materials with them. And then we're in an environment, back in that environment, but they see that that's why I've come, and so they leave me alone pretty much to do that with a couple of helpers.
And how can people pray for you? What are some of the pressing prayer concerns at this time, 2012?
Well, I would say probably that when we go back, that we can take what we've done in the book of Hebrews and really that it's understandable to them as we work through the checking of it, and that it becomes a good book for them to use. And that also the church would continue to maintain and teach themselves, and that the leaders would stay in their positions and teach well and stay pure as well. It's a rough life down there for them. What would you say? What else would they? Good to pray for these guys. Also pray for us as we travel. We got a lot of miles to cover on our own furlough this year.
And then you're heading back in a couple of months.
We're going back to Delaware, but we won't be going back to Paraguay until November. So we've got about 6 more months from now?
Something like that.
And people can contact you through Facebook, email.
Cell phones.
Excellent. Well, this is a fascinating time, and I'm very grateful you guys took the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.